Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'll be your host today, and we're going to be talking about killing games early. Marketing can amplify a game, but it can't fix an unproven concept. But still, many developers push forward, hoping things will turn around, when the smarter move may be to kill the project. So today we're going to examine why killing a game early is often a more strategic decision than continuing out of hope, habit, or sunk costs. We also explore the beliefs that keep weak projects alive and how to read early signals with clarity, separating meaningful validation from noise before committing years of time and resources. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back. And today with us, I am so happy to have him here again. We have Neil Edwards. Neil, how's it going, man? And great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, it's going really well. Super glad to be back. I always love talking shop. You and I are always back and forth discording, deciding
Yes.
when we've got enough stuff kind of chucked together, it might make a good another kind of formal episode. So yeah, no, I'm doing really well. I'm super glad to be back.
Yeah, same here. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with Neil, he's been on the show a few times now. Maybe the most.
I'm trying to get that number one spot, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get that number one lifelong member spot.
I think for you, it's been a kind of back and forth between you and Chris Zukowski, but in a more official capacity, I think it definitely is you in the lead because there's some special episodes Chris is part of. But yeah, I think. But anyways, it doesn't matter. It's not like a contest or anything. But
Make it a contest. But I'm very, very, very glad to be up there with Chris. Super smart guy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, no, it's. Yeah, and folks, if you want to check out any of the previous episodes, we're gonna get right into the conversation pretty quickly, actually. So if you want to check out past episodes, get some ideas of what Q box questions and answers that Neil had to share, check them out. I don't have the list of the numbers, unfortunately, but if you just go to look up Indie Game Movement Podcast, do the first link, which should be the Libsyn one, and there's a nice little search bar there. You could type in Neil Edwards. Edward should pop them up too, and you'll see those past episodes. But anyways, enough of that. Neil, great to have you back. And today, as I shared in the introduction, we're talking about, honestly, this is kind of a different, not really different, but we really haven't had this conversation on the show yet. And we're going to be talking about killing games early. And my take here on the show is it's about different perspectives and everything else. And honestly, I don't think this is one we covered all that much, and it's really important because there's a lot of crap going on. So, all right, Neil, let's get to it. To kind of kick things off here, when would you say persistence and stuff, stop being disciplined and start becoming denial in game development? When does that happen? Because it's there's a fine line between those two things. Hey, let's keep going with this, but then when should we really consider this?
To me, it's about signals and feedback, and it's about are you getting signals? So that's step one, right? Are you even getting signals? Are you even soliciting feedback? And I specifically don't just mean feedback on your game, because as we'll probably touch on in this episode, something I've been banging the drum on internally in my own studio recently and with other dev friends and folks that I mentor and things like that is, this was, I think, the topic of one of our last episodes, is people don't buy your game. They buy the premise of your game. The numbers will show you that the overwhelming majority of people that buy your game have never played your game, even if you have a demo. And so they're buying something else, the idea of it. So when I say, are you getting feedback? Are you getting signals? I'm not specifically talking just about playtesting your game. If you're not playtesting your game, that's its own problem. But we tend to focus so much on playtesting the game, but we don't really focus so much on the fact that that's the fourth or fifth step in the journey of someone buying your game, which is the funnel you need to have happen to succeed and be able to keep making games. People need to buy it. I'm not saying you don't need to make a good game. I'm not saying you can just make a buzz crazy, catchy concept and succeed. but we overfocus on that. So back to what I was saying, are you getting signals? Are you getting enough of them? When are you getting them? And then are you listening to them, right? And do you have sort of decision-making criteria and priorities and vision type things, constraints, sort of business needs, even in a very low and humble way, do you have those things in place to help you process those signals and make those decisions? So to more squarely answer your question, I'd say, you know, discipline is pushing forward to get to that point where you can start getting signals. Like if you're not there where you can't start getting signals, but I would argue that point's really early. It's discipline if you're pushing to get to that point, or you've got some signals that are giving you some positive, kind of the feedback that this is a worthwhile endeavor. It has, commercial viability to meet your needs, and you're grinding it out to get to that next thing. But when it becomes denial or sort of like avoiding getting those signals out of fear, which I can deeply empathize with, this isn't like Andrew and I, like from our high ivory towers that we've got it all figured out.
Yeah,
This is
we
like,
don't.
we deeply empathize with the human part of this, that it's hard to kill things and hard to like look, your game in the face and realize, oh, maybe this was not the right thing to make. But yeah, to me, it's all about denial. Is you're either not getting the signals, not working towards them, or the signals have come in and you're like, just, they don't know, and you just keep pushing forward. So that's what it's about for me.
Yeah, I love that you took a moment to kind of like define denial, like in the context that we're using it, because I know it could be interpreted in different ways, right? Like, nope, we're just gonna do it, and like I'm not listening. Like, there's I just thought of an example. I'm not going to use it. It's too dark. But like, there's moments. It involves a submarine. There's moments when that does happen. But I think the more realistic side of it, as you were saying, and that you also empathize. Like, I mean, you experience it yourself. Is there's going to be like, but I strongly believe in this. It's my baby. Like that's always going to happen. Like there's so many like it's essentially emotional ties. I think that can lead to this form of denial, in a sense that we can all relate with and understand too why we get to that point.
Yeah, and the other thing is like, can't you kind of can't deny what doesn't exist, and so that's another way we protect ourselves. Like if you're not out there like elevator pitching your concept to see if people are intrigued by it and want to know more, or floating up a Steam page, or doing some type of early concept testing or play testing. If you're not doing it, there's those signals to deny, right? And that's another way that we kind of keep ourselves down this, it's like, oh, it's just, it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. And the thing I deeply empathize with is, as game makers, because I'm still figuring this out in my day to day, like Luke and I are still figuring out how do we test ideas earlier before they're even playable, right? And I think as game designers and leaders and things like that, we often get taught that like the game is all that matters. Like it's all about the game and the gameplay and the gameplay experience. And it's like, I mean, I'm a lifetime game designer, lifetime UXer. Like I get that the gameplay experience is important, but I think there's a lack of education, myself included, a lack of understanding of, a little bit more of the product side of things. So it can be really tough nut to crack thinking about, how do I effectively test game concepts? And I've seen we're trying some interesting things internally. I've seen some other interesting things from other companies that I'll probably bring up later in the chat, about ways people are finding innovative ways to like test concepts earlier and get those signals to see if your premise is something people are into. Because if they're not into the premise, you can make the best version of that thing as possible. It's probably not going to convert.
Yeah. Yeah. Real quick, I know when we were talking about denial and everything, a lot of that, essentially what we're, touching upon is like these are beliefs. So are there any kind of like beliefs that maybe either you've had in yourself or that you see from like other studios or that might keep a underperforming game alive longer than it should? Like, what are these beliefs
Yeah.
that keep us holding on?
Oh, I mean, I'll just rattle off some random anecdotal ones. They're all very I mean, the we're not ready yet. So this is the not testing because, you think that the prototype's not in good enough shape, and that can drag on from days to weeks to months to years. I've seen it as brazen as like, oh, players just don't get it. or there's a lot of times denial around like scapegoating within your design. Like, oh, the tutorial is really bad. So like that's why people aren't having fun. That's why they're not getting it. We need to fix the tutorial or we need to fix X. They want to sort of, I call it polishing the silverware while the house is on fire. Fix a certain subsystem. And maybe that is the answer, right? But
Yeah, and that's the thing. Some of these things can be the answer too, which is makes it
they
tough.
absolutely can, which is, again, none of this is me saying it's easy. It's saying
Yeah.
we all do ourselves a favor by focusing on it more. I don't know, what are some other ones? There's, and some of them are not even just like beliefs about, that feed denial. Some of it's challenges, right? Some of it's
Yeah.
uh we don't know how to get the game in front of the right audience, or things like that that actually genuinely block you from getting the signals can also kind of exacerbate this effect as well.
Yeah, and as we were saying that too, another one that relates a lot to, the work that I do is kind of around like this idea about visibility, right? So let's say, oh, like, a big one we all have, everybody has this problem is like, oh, funding, budgets, all that stuff. And especially when it comes to marketing, funding goes into the project and then later into marketing because of, well, lots of obvious reasons. But then there's also that point where it's like, the belief of, oh, we just need that more exposure. If I had this money, if I had the support, not whatever the if is, whatever that thing is, like we often see that too sometimes, like kind of mask maybe even deeper problems, even with that idea and concept.
I'm really glad you bring that up. I can't believe I kind of forgot that one. I would argue that's like kind of the one of the biggest ones. So games that are in like mid and late stages or even out there, that's probably the biggest one I would say like indie devs struggle with, is like, oh, it would have worked. We just didn't get the exposure. We just don't have the marketing budget, so we couldn't get enough people to see it. When really it shouldn't take so many people to see it to at least give you the signal, are people engaged by this, right? So it's like you do need enough people to like hit the scope of success, but to get the signal of like, is that conversion rate working? Are people into this and want to buy it? You don't need some mass of people. You can use quite a small subset and get that data. The other thing is that kind of, I think, a bit of a false belief that leads to this as well. I've been putting together kind of a slide deck talk of sorts that contains a lot of these kind of relevant things. And one thing that I realized kind of recently, a false belief that a lot of us have, is like, we think that like the more work we put into our game, the more success it will yield.
Yeah.
And we think that that's like not a linear, but a linear-ish relationship. Like if I put more time into my game, it will be higher quality. And we think the same thing for marketing. If I put more time into marketing, if I hire someone, the game will do better, my revenue will go up. And my counterpoint, and I don't know if this is a hot take, but like the concept you choose defines a lot of what I believe is a revenue threshold. And so the more work you put into your game, the more work you put into your marketing, your game's revenue and success will go up, but capped within a threshold that is shaped by other choices at your product level. And so it's not like, oh, if I just put 12 months of work into this 2D platformer, I can make it a $250,000 game. It may that be you could work on that thing for 10 years and it would still only be a $50,000 game, versus you could pick some other genre and some other concept that's got a better conversion rate and is better performing in the market these days, put half the time into it and get 6x the outcome, right? And so we think it's just like a mountain we're climbing. And my point is that you're climbing like a local mountain that has a maximum that I think is defined more by your concept and your genre and some high level product decisions than just the amount of work you put into it.
Yeah. For an analogy here, it's like you're climbing the Green Mountains in Vermont, thinking they're the highest ones in the area, but then right next door you have the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like if you think you climb for 3 years on your game, then you'll get to the top of Everest. But if you're on a hill, you could climb for 3 years, and
Right.
all the highest point you're ever going to get is the top of that hill.
Yeah. It's all
Yeah,
it's all relative. And
yeah,
the thing that's hard is like when we're in these situations, we don't really have much to compare to. And that comparison is usually what we perceive those peaks, those successes are. But the reality is, it's like it's really hard to get a view of that landscape. I don't care how long you've been in the industry for, it can still be a challenge. There's maybe certain, and I don't want to say these things are like formulaic or anything, but there are certain systems that people follow that, allow them to be sustainable. But even under those environments too, in those systems, there are still studios that have gone for what, 10, 15 plus years, and they still shut down.
Yeah,
So it doesn't matter.
absolutely. I mean, the caveat to this whole conversation, any conversation, is like hashtag making games is really effing hard, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so and so the thing that I'm passionate about is less like banging the drum of like, I'm smart, I have the answers, and it's more of like, man, this is a really important problem, and we need like as indies that want to survive and thrive and like continue to be able to like pay our bills doing what we love. We've got to get better at it. We've got to, and so part of it is like more of a passion for me of like, I don't want to beat people over the head and say, hey, you dummies, focus on this. It's more for me like a call of like, together as peers, as collaborators, why are we not talking about this more? I know it's very difficult. I know,
Yeah.
like I said, we're struggling right now internally. We're coming up with like totally new ways to try to think about testing concepts and things like that because, there's big market type of ways that people do this, but we don't always have access to those tools. So, like, how do we do it in a way that works for us? Those are very hard questions to answer. So, it's less about showing up with answers and more about like, who wants to ask this question with me and try to figure it out,
Yeah.
and push through that difficulty, and instead of just saying, oh well, let's just focus on the things that come naturally to us, because that's another kind of, not a false belief, but like that's a huge pit of like we tend to do the things that are comfortable for us, focusing on the design, focusing on the gameplay, focusing
Right.
on the coding, the areas where we feel comfortable. And instead of, and we tend to lose out on some really key insights of like, I don't really know how to do this, but we got to figure out how to test this concept, test the Steam page earlier, test if I tell 10 people about my game in one sentence, does anyone react? Does anyone
Right.
get engaged?
Yeah, there's so many things there. And, it's, man, I just lost my train of thought. But I mean, all this is really important too, because like from what we were just talking about too, is like these ideas of essentially like, fall summits. We're doing everything that we can to get to this point, think we can still climb and everything. But really, there is a point where maybe we just do need to stop and reconsider what it is. And that's what I was going to say is you bring up an interesting point. It's not about the answers. And I've, in my work and even like day-to-day life, I realize this a lot, probably in the past like 2 to 3 years. It's not really about having the right answers or just an answer, right? And that's important too, to have an answer, because it gives
Yeah.
you clarity. It allows you to have a solution, at least to a solution to a problem that you need to solve, right? But the more that I look back in the past few years, I realize the huge importance more than anything is it's really about having it's more about having the right questions
Yeah.
and really
Are
thinking
you
about what those
asking those
are.
questions?
Yes, and following through, asking them, and really thinking deeply about them, because that's one thing that I've seen a lot, especially in the industry, is is this like, and we alluded to it earlier. You provide some great specific examples where a lot of these things, these problems, challenges we face, we look at them as, oh, this could be the problem, this could be the root cause, but in reality, a lot of times it could just be a symptom.
Yeah.
And if we're not asking deeper questions around what we're seeing that is surfaced, it's going to be very hard to get to that root cause. And in some situations, it can be what is a symptom can also be the root cause, but it's not always the case.
Absolutely.
And you shared something else too. I thought it's like, and that's the other thing I wanted to say is when you talked about being comfortable. Another way I look at this too is through comfort. It's actually a matter of control. And what do we have control over? We have
Yeah.
control over our project. No matter what everything else is going on the outside or everywhere else, we know I can pull this lever. I can spend more time on this and everything else, and therefore that comfort, that control could reinforce some of these beliefs that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and to me, it's about focus, right? Like one of the things that I've learned, so I've been running a game studio not for very long, only for about 2.5 years now. We've got one game launched, a second game in the works, third game very early in the works, and so it's just been really eye-opening just like when you do this for a living or you're trying to do it for a living, like the catastrophic cost of not being zoomed out enough and not focusing on the right things. And I don't mean like not putting the right feature in your game. I mean like being confident that that's the right game to make and having some type of, metric, qualitative, quantitative, or otherwise, or collection of metrics, collection of signals, even if they're anecdotal, right? I mean, a handful of anecdotal evidence, I mean, unless it's totally leading you off a cliff, which is possible, even a handful of anecdotal evidence tends to be much better than because of the things you can kind of learn around gathering that evidence than no evidence and no feedback at all. And so I've just learned like, if you're trying to do this for a living or you are, man, is it so important to be looking at the whole picture. And it's so difficult to maintain that because you're constantly like, hey, this print deadline's coming up or this thing's coming up. We need to be making the feature. We need to be but it's like, you really got to make sure that you're making the right stuff because like the most devastating thing is to spend years working on something that's basically doomed from the start. Like no matter what you do, it has a really hard cap on its success. And I've seen a lot of people, and I've even gone down that path myself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's a great lead into this other idea too, because I mean, essentially what you said just now relates even to something you said earlier about like the concept, right? Like kind of vetting it out, knowing that to some extent that it has like some commercial viability. And folks, this really comes down to, like we've said numerous times on the show before, is like do your market research, right? Do your audience research, or do whatever you can, even if you have limited skill sets or limited resources in which you can do this with. Even going through those exercises is going to be better off than not doing it all. But
Yeah.
these concepts essentially is for these projects, right? You're identifying these essentially as a primary risk variable. So, and since you're exploring this yourself too and everything, I'm just kind of curious, like what practical ways can like maybe teams test a concept strength before production begins? Because at face value, we're always thinking, oh, play test, right? But I mean, is there
Yeah.
anything else?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I'm still trying to crack this nut for Steam and digital games. I've talked to you about this in the past. I haven't figured out the answer, but if anyone out there kind of hears what we do on the board game world, then maybe they can adapt it or chat about it. So what we did was, we basically paid a decent amount of money to have the art made for our game and things like that, art, 3D renders, things like that. And then we worked with a partner who helped us a lot with sort of targeting and basically ran some meta ad campaigns with a few different creatives, a few different images, a few different text stuff. And, you can do this for as cheap as like $20 a day and basically, drive for email signups, but much more importantly, much more valuably, if you can work in some type of financial commitment. So for us, it was a $1 pre-deposit, and you would get basically a free goodie if you signed up. And the reason that that's so important is because email signups, kind of like wish lists, have become like less and less meaningful over time. Like a wish list has meant less every year since like the beginning of Steam because people just wish list everything. They don't really show up to buy it, right? And then wish list conversions are actually still pretty decent. Email list conversions sit around 5% off like a good email list, right? So if you think about getting, you know, 1,000 people, right? That's a lot of effing people. If you have a 5% conversion, what's that? 50 people, right? So, did I do the math right? I think I did. Um, that's 50 people in the end. Like that's a huge, like that's a really low confidence interval and a really low data set, but that's the best you're going to get off an email campaign. The difference is, and I have hard data of my project and many other projects to back this up, as soon as you do like a $1 or a $5 pre-deposit, that conversion is almost a 10x higher. It goes from about 4 to 5 to 40 to 50%, right? And it costs you more in ads to get these people, but it's a much better sample of are people actually into something. And the thing is, like, people are like, well, what? I don't know. Find a way to make up some free goodie, something that's hopefully compelling related. Maybe if you're making a digital game, it's like a free item, a limited exclusive item you'll get on day one that only people from this campaign will get. Make it up. You know, not to sound evil, but most people forget this dollar anyway. And if you have it, like, let's say you don't end up launching your game, refund the dollar. Who cares? It's not that big of a deal. It ends up being like I said, you can do this for about $20 a day. The challenge is, where do people for your platform go for games? So for us, it's very well established that board game people are on Instagram and they're on Facebook, right? And so we can run meta ads and it works. I don't really know what that answer is for Steam, but doing a very similar style of testing, I think has a ton of legs. So do some, get someone to do some fake mock-ups. So, I mean, you don't even necessarily have to build the game. Build some fake game screens of what you imagine. This also allows you to, and forces you to kind of develop the concept more. What's the elevator? If I were to say this to my friend, hey, Andrew, at the water cooler, like on Monday, like, oh, I played this badass game this weekend. What are those 12, 15, 20 words that I say to you? And it helps you hone your message, helps you hone your hook, helps you hone those things. So I'm a big believer in some type of approach like that. I'm a big believer also in literally just qualitative, like verbally sharing it with people. We have the opportunity to like go to like conventions and things like that. So we'll see fans and other people, and we'll just describe the game to them. And one, it teaches us how to hone the pitch a lot. Like, I mean, you see people's face and you actually start to really kind of develop the skill and really notice, oh, when did their eyes changed there? Their eyes got big, their eyes lit up, they were engaged, they were bored. And you start to be able to really find what are the keywords. What I mean, you can kind of almost like it's like a symphony. You can kind of see, you'd be amazed like the emotion you see play out on someone's face. So finding like events to go to, even like local meetups. The other thing is you can pretend if you want to try to make the data less biased, pretend it's not your game. Pretend it's a released game. Say, hey, Andrew, I played this game this weekend. It was blah, 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 and pitch it as your game and just completely fake it. Like it doesn't, again, it doesn't have to be real. Anything you can do to get up a landing page to try to get conversions. I mean, make a fake Steam page, make a real Steam page, throw some fake mock-ups up there, hone that, find a way to spend some money to get some ads to see what the conversion's looking like. Last one I can think of, at least off the top of my head, I saw a great talk on YouTube the other day by the people who made that, what are they called? Like rage games? They made that rage game about the guy on all fours rollerblading like to work, like climbing the corporate ladder. I can't remember what it's called, but it's this very like, viral rage game. And they said what they started doing is they started just making pitch decks. So like ugly, rough internal pitch decks, and they just share them. They share them with friends and family. They share them with people maybe in their Discord. They share them just around other communities just to get, anecdotal, qualitative feedback. Not like, hey, do you like my game? But like, would you be interested in this? And just like getting people's reaction to that. So you could say, oh, none of that's scientific. Like you're totally right. A bunch of it's not scientific, but I will go to my grave arguing that doing some of that stuff and doing a bunch of it arguably is way better than doing none of it and just hoping and praying. You'd be amazed at how much data you can mine from a simple verbally pitching someone a game and passing and just seeing. Do they ask for a link? Do they ask, oh, hey, what's the name of that game called? I wanna buy it on Steam. And then the cat's out of the bag and you say, oh, that's the new game we're working on. I just wanted to test the idea, So yeah, those are some off the cuff ideas, and I'm still trying to refine more stuff. We're gonna start doing more and more early testing, more kind of landing page style things with just a little bit of art, titles, stuff like that.
Wow, so many amazing ideas here, folks. And let me tell you, like, it's funny. Some of these that you're sharing, I know we had like conversations about this, like, I don't know, a while ago, but
Yeah.
they popped up and stuff. And what I loved about hearing this again is, and I think this is what kind of prompted this conversation too, because my background, my history has come from like B2B, B2C agencies and stuff, and a lot of what you talked about, and even just a lot of listening to podcasts in the entrepreneurial space, a lot of what you talked about, I mean, has been vetted and validated in numerous other types of industries. So there's no reason why a lot of these things that you just shared couldn't be applied. They just might need to be adapted or shifted a little bit, but there's no reason why. But the fact is, and I'm sure some people are utilizing them, that they have to be, but I don't see it like mainstream talked about too much.
Yeah.
Um, at any rate, but I mean, let's like kind of quickly go through some of them that you shared. Like the pre-sale one, I think is so interesting because if we think about it, when we think of pre-sales, are like, oh, well, nobody's gonna pre-purchase my game. Well, it's like we're not asking people to pre-purchase, and what that does is one, it immediately shows intent. And this again, this practice has been used in everything from like let's say entrepreneurial online courses. Set up a beta. A
Yeah.
beta course, be like, hey, look, this is a beta, something I'm experimenting with. I'm putting it out there, see if you're interested, right? And charge. And in this scenario, people could charge like something of value so it's like they might charge $75 or something, right? But
Or hey, this is a new course I'm about to release. If you put down $5 now, it'll be sure to reserve your spot. Like,
yeah,
like
exactly.
all
There's
kinds of ways.
to position it. And the thing is, sometimes in these cases, like the course example I was using, the people don't even have the course yet. They're
100%.
faking it, like you said, like
Because it doesn't make sense to spend years or months of your time and money making content that no one wants. So find a way to prove that someone wants what you're making and then make it.
and hey, there is one outlet out there that does this to essentially. It's called Kickstarter or crowdfunding more broadly. But guess what? But I'm saying that because that doesn't have to be the only option we consider. Because sometimes when we go back to some of those questions, some of those problems we have, oh, how do we get money? And then Kickstarter comes up, and there's so many other factors like, and remember how we talked about comfort? Well, these things that we're talking about, yes, there might be some investment of time and in yourself to or others to kind of get the skills and resources to set some of these things up. But honestly, there's so many ways and there's so much information out there that make it way more accessible. And on top of that, it gives you that level of control. And even if they're small signals, you're still getting something. So if someone's paying like $5 to sign up for this because you have that really compelling pitch, which like you shared before, like, hey, I pitched this in numerous different ways, communities, whatever. I got the signal. Okay, now I have enough information. Now I'm going to say, hey, for to sign up for this for $5, maybe run an ad campaign to this landing page, and people are actually buying this that is just maybe you're just in prototyping stage. Well, at least now you have hard data. It's validated, and then you can move forward with it. And that doesn't mean, hey, I got like 50 people to sign up for $5, and that then I'm going to keep going. No, there still needs to be other like I wouldn't say milestones, but like checkpoints to further validate the concept. And I think that's something that we don't always look at so much is like how are we establishing these checkpoints in terms of how we're validating receiving signals. Actually, I think some of this concept or system was shared by Philanema Schwab of Stray Fawn. She did, I think, a few talks and did a GDC talk and a few other talks. So similar idea and concept here. But essentially what I'm saying is identify what these checkpoints are. And it's almost like a if this, then if this or that, you go one direction or the other. So it's like, hey, if this checks off, you move forward. If it doesn't, go back. And then at so many times, if you're circling that loop too many times, that could just be the logic.
That's when you get to exit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think we look at it that way. And it's funny because I think as creators in this space, we often will look at things very objectively. But when it's our own creation, it's really hard to.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think it's such and when I talked about like the catastrophic risk of like spending years or months working on the wrong thing, it's such a mindset thing that I think we all, myself included, like, and I'm very guilty of not doing this, which is part of why I bang the drum is like to help myself in our studio. But it's like this idea of we think about like we commit mentally to like we're like, all right, I gotta make this game. I'm making this roguelike deck builder, and like think it's gonna take me a year. And then like each day you wake up and you're going to work, and like you're focused on making the thing instead of looking at it like in the early stages as a concept of like, should I be making this? And should I like that one layer removed of like I'm making the game to be able to ask the question of like, should I be making this? Am I making the right thing? Is like just a world of difference. And it is hard to achieve. But the super quickly, the comment you made me think of two other things. One, which you've done a lot of, and I don't think this is like in and of itself a complete way to like develop a concept or validate it, but just digging through, if you want to enter into a genre, start combing through the comments of the big games in that
Oh
genre.
yeah, yeah,
Find the pain points, find the requests. Like, is there a through line where everyone's asking for MMO that did this, right? Like, what's the common? Because that to me is in line with the entrepreneurial comment you made, like a very classic, like buzzy entrepreneurial thing to do, but they do it for a reason, is call up a bunch of, call up 50 potential customers and, in your line of work, whatever it is, say you're making a, financial management, SaaS product or something. See if you can get 50 people that are potential customers on the phone and say, if I could, fix your top 3 problems with this type of, with your workflow or with this type of software, what would those be? And asking customers what they want, right? And so thinking about doing the same thing with gamers, find people, in that space and talk about what do they wish was out there that isn't out there.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
You're absolutely right. And in fact, there's a lot of things that I've done. And for a while, I did that exact process. I was like, all right, I have this idea for something. Before I start, putting it out there, I'd reach out to studios, I'd reach out to publishers and asking them a series, like just essentially a quick interview. And, the insights were extremely revealing. And what it did was allowed me with some of the things that we're working on to better position them. So, or to better position them for, let's say, marketing purposes, or let's say inform some of the things I was presenting. Maybe the process that I was using needed to change because of the feedback that they were providing. I mean, there's so much valuable information that comes out of those types of interactions. And hey, look, if you really want to do it at scale, boom, you also, the internet is inundated with reviews. But there's ways you can figure out, once you start reading a bunch of them, you can start figuring out, oh, this common thread comes up. Oh, this other thing. Here's this common thing that I could care less about, but now I know how to filter that information, right? So there's lots of things you can do pretty quickly just by reading this. And then you're just going to be that much more intuitive, receptive, understanding of what else is out there. And then at a point, you don't want to get lost in all this information either. But at a point, you'll be like, all right, I don't need to know everything, but now I know enough to feel a little bit more confident, to feel a little bit more, to have more clarity in the direction that I'm taking. Like I have that insight that can at least point me in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps you form a clear hypothesis and a hypothesis deeper than like people will be into my game because, right? Like, and I'm a big believer that you need to have a super strong hypothesis going into it about why your game is going to work and separate itself.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get down to kind of the I don't know, it's not really brass tacks, but the bottom line here and kind of what we're here to talk about, like the killing question. I'm gonna phrase it that way. If and this could be very well someone who's listening right now. So if a team is at a point, let's say they had however many of days, but let's say they have a couple of months that they have to make the decision whether they give it another year or so of development or not. Like, what are types of things that we should consider before just saying, yeah, we're going to continue with this? Like, because I think this is a big question, a really big, almost loaded question that a lot of us face. And I don't always want that answer to be the default of, well, let's just be persistent and hope and everything else, because that's not what we're here to talk about. So what are some factors we can consider and think about why we should move forward or kill it?
Damn right, we're not here to talk about hope. I think it's, and not to be circular, but I think it's just the stuff we just talked about, right? So like if you're in a position where you're not sure if you should keep going, there's really 2 things you can test. And I think you need to test both of them. And I think we spend way too much time testing one and way little time testing the other. You can test your gameplay, like your gameplay experience. Won't really focus on that because it's pretty straightforward. Lots of resources out there. How do you do good play testing? How do you find the right audience? Like, you need to be play testing your game. You need to be listening to that feedback if people aren't engaged. But that's different. That's people playing your game and testing if someone likes your game is not really a great signal about if they'll buy it because you need a good game to keep players and then turn those players into evangelists who leave positive ratings, who tell people and spread the game and all those things. Like you can't have a success without a good game. But a good game, I would argue, is not really what sells your game initially, at least. It can create this kind of positive, circuitous kind of like reinforcing loop where, people are saying good things about it, streamers are liking it. Like that is a good component. So testing that part, I think people have that much more figured out. But then it's, testing the concept, not the game, the concept, the premise. So for me, that's all about what we just talked about. It is whether it's a Steam page, whether it's a fake Steam page, whether it's a landing page, finding some type of way to where you can drive people, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 people a day, 5 people a day, if that's all you can get, to some type of page and make some type of clear, action of intent to purchase your game. A wish list or a wish list equivalent is like, that's decent, but it's better than nothing. Like definitely at least do that. Definitely at least, figure out, do people want to get notified when this game launches, right? That's step one. Step two is, can you implement some type of financially motivated intent? Because that's going to give you a much clearer signal. So can you do a $1, get a free runic sword or get a special character? Like what can you, if you can't make it so valuable, like we can't add a feature or these, make it exclusive, right? Make it something that is, special. Or I don't know, dude, if you put down $1, you get a discount on the game. I mean, I haven't thought through all these things, but like get someone to put in their credit card in some way, because then you're going to get closer between a 30 and a 50% kind of conversion and confidence interval on those people. If you're in the early days, I'd say, you know, make a web page and even just shop it around to friends, shop it around in sort of communities you're a part of. I know it's tough because like Reddit and everything is like so anti self-promotion and things like that. So you may have to kind of like, skirt the lines a little bit of, I'm not saying spam communities that don't allow self-promotion, but find ways to introduce the game to people that isn't laden with, this is my game, so sharing links and things like that, and other communities you're a part of, finding other gamers, you know, friends and family is kind of not probably the worst audience, but it's probably better than no audience, as long as you can find some, as long as you find some really honest, a caveat that friends and family may be worse than asking nobody, unless you can find some really honest friends and family, because you don't want to get false positives. But to me, it's about shop that concept around. And at the very least, go to like I don't know, a cafe, a game dev meetup or something, and pretend you played a game the past weekend and pitch your game super briefly, like you would, remember the last time you played a game you really liked, like the first time you played Belotro, and you went and told someone about it. Tell someone about your game like that, and just don't introduce it as your game, and just see what they say. See if they just kind of like, oh, cool, or if they want to know more. If they ask for a link, if they ask for what's it called, if they ask to write it down on their phone because they want to look it up later, like just what can you get some data, some slight signal that the concept is engaging to people? Because we didn't really get into this, but a lot of this was inspired to me by recently reading Contagious, which is a wonderful book, by the way, and Made to Stick, right? Which are two books. One's about what are the properties that make ideas stick with people, like remember them, stand out. And the other one is, what are the properties of ideas that make people more likely to share those ideas? Actually, shout out to those two books. If you're an indie developer in charge of making games in any way, shape, or form, I don't care if you're a marketing person, absolutely read those books. They're freaking great.
Made to Stick is great. I don't think I've actually finished it, but I got pretty far through. And one of the things I loved about that, how it opens too, is the whole premise, I think, if I remember correctly, that the author and what kind of influenced them to write the book was actually the idea of I think like urban legends and
Yes.
myths and things, because it surfaces throughout the whole book about Why are there stories like Aesop's fables, right? Brothers Grimm,
Yeah.
even like things that happened around like,
Why is there still stories that have lasted from the 90s that people still think are true or aren't sure if
and
they're true, that
there's
are
no data
been
to support
they've
those
been
stories whatsoever.
well, and they also were largely publicly debunked, like in the news. Like a lot of these things were totally debunked in the news and things like that. But people just, that's not what they remember. They remember the fantastic story.
Yes.
The thing about that I loved about, I don't know if it was Made to Stick or Contagious, but one of them or both in their own ways had really practical examples and tips about how to find things that aren't necessarily your core thing that can make your product more contagious or remarkable,
Mm.
or how to add things, right? And I'm not talking about just like bolt stuff on to make your game catchy, but there's really clever examples in there about how people, like the Snapple example is like one of my favorite things. Like, Snapple, just iced tea, like who cares? It's a million iced teas. And all of a sudden, when they implemented the whole facts under the cap, they implemented these really surprising facts, like something about some giant animal that you'd be like, you'd always raise your eyebrows, or these very absurd, remarkable facts. And it absolutely, that's not core to Snapple at all, but it was a way to insert it into the Snapple product and the Snapple experience that it just skyrocketed their sales because people were always talking about the recent Snapple fact they heard. It kept the product top of mind,
Yeah.
which made it obviously more likely to purchase. And again, I'm not saying I know indie devs are sometimes cynical. I'm not in the whole
Yeah.
marketing
Don't
side of things. I'm
embellish
not saying
things like over the top, like crazy, but it's not, and
just
that's not what this is saying either.
it was opportunity. I think what I loved about it is like if your product, this was their point. Their point was like if your product is inherently boring, which no one thinks their game is, but like they gave a great example of like blenders, right? From like the 80s or something. This guy developed this blender and then like he made this series of videos because he's an engineer, mechanical engineer. He made this blender. It was so powerful, it would just like turn golf
Oh,
balls
I
and
know
like
what you're
two by
talking about.
fours into dust. And so like like, there's ways that you can, without being disingenuous or untruthful or like bolting crap on, there's ways that you can invigorate your product to make it a more compelling concept without just being like, oh, my game's a blender, so it'll never survive. So I just got to destroy the blender. It's like, I don't want to encourage people to like, invest in things that are maybe like,
Well,
sunk cost fallacy, but there's ways to invigorate things as well that should be looked at.
Well, and with the blender example, if I remember correctly, like I immediately identify this because then I think he made a series called "Will It Blend,"
Yes, 100%.
and then they're
He
just
would just
taking.
put random, he would just put random shit, and it was like the early days of YouTube, and it just went super viral. It's obviously much harder to go viral today, but like that was the right time, right place where he just would like he basically, and that also became a value proposition for his blender. Like
Yes. Yep.
my blender is strong as fuck. It will never die. You can put all kind, and he would just throw random shit in there, and it would just turn into powder.
And I think he was like very like stoic and like just if
He was like an old stoic dude. He was like, I think he was like, he was, I shouldn't say old. I think he was like 50s or something, but
yeah,
very
but
not YouTube, not
no,
like
no
online
real like
personality.
yeah, exactly. No personality like what we're used
Yeah.
to. Yeah, it is great. So
Turn
uh,
your game into the world's best blender,
yeah,
folks.
there you go. I love that line. But yeah, so many things here too. And I mean, before we close, I just want to add a few things too in terms of like that initial question, because you covered a lot. I mean, still, you need those validations and everything else too, right? But then I think there's other like maybe milestones or moments where it's like, okay, if let's say you give yourself one more year, if you can confidently go out there and say, hey, look, in a year, based off of our track record and everything else, we know we can get this product out and deliver. However, I think expectations need to shift a little bit. Meaning, like, don't keep hoping, oh, if we do more X, Y, Z, especially if you, let's say, you do the work, you do maybe some of the suggestions that Neil mentioned, and you're still not getting that feedback. But let's say you're so close, let's say within a year, that you can confidently assure that you will deliver a product. I think in situations like that, when you're that close, you're better off finishing the product than not having anything under your belt, especially if it's like a first project. But
Yeah.
what I'm not, but what you don't want to do is have it trail on longer. Try to convince yourself that you can make it happen when you know your track record maybe historically, if you keep good deadlines in place and stuff that you can't deliver on that, it's tough, but you got to weigh those things in too. But so that's always the factors too. And I think one more thing, because I know a lot of people with all those amazing ideas that you shared earlier, Neil, I think there are people that are going to be like, yeah, but that's time away from making my game. Here's the thing. You got to give yourself permission to take a break sometimes and work on the things that are going to give you the information or the support or whatever you need to move forward. Another great example is, I think it was Seth Koster had on the show, and he did some talks about this, about DevOps. And the conversation I keep going back that he shared on the show, and I think with others, was he was having a talk with Unity developers saying, hey, look, and it's the team is his two other brothers primarily at the time. And they're like, we were looking at our timelines. We looked at that, hey, in order to hit the deadline that we needed, we wouldn't be able to because I think he said, like, someone on the team, I think it might have been himself, was serving as a bottleneck because, work was piling up or whatever. So like, why don't we streamline the process? And then we have to take a break. We have to develop these tools to do that. And I think they said a 6 months break, but in doing so, they actually reduced the deadline for the project. And he was sharing that with Unity developers, and they were saying, like, that doesn't make sense to us. How could you take a 6 month break and finish earlier? But the thing is that because they could see
efficiency gains.
Exactly. That much can happen. And that whole process is no different than giving yourself permission, doing a lot of these things. And because look at it from an efficiency gain, even though it's different than DevOps in that situation, if you find out you're not getting the feedback you need, you're not getting the signals, you realize that your product that you're making isn't identifying maybe any gaps, it's just mediocre, not like nothing special, that efficiency gain in itself is you saying, all right, let's move on to something we're a bit more confident in, we have more understanding in. Because if you put all those resources and energy and time that doesn't pay out, that's not an efficiency gain, that's a slow burnout, and that who knows what can happen. And
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, it's about like impact of your time, right? And if you end up making a game that bombs, which I get that it's very hard, but like if you make a game that's bombs, like the sad, horrifying reality is that like the impact of all your time was I mean, personal learning, but like financially zero, right? And so it's about risk management and risk mitigation. And for me, it's like making a game is like kind of like sailing across the ocean, like hundreds of years ago. It's like if you're just dead set on sailing for 2 years to the west and you haven't been able to investigate what's over there and if it's a hellscape or if it's a fruitful tropical paradise where you can actually survive, that's a very high risk one-way journey to take.
So let's limit that risk. And if it checks out, I don't know, take what we said with a grain of salt, but I don't know, think a little bit think a little bit more about seriously killing your games. And that sounds absolutely horrible. And but in this context, I think it perhaps might provide some clarity, but by no means.
Yeah, you want to make sure you're working on, you want to get, and there's no, like I said, there's no crystal balls. Like none of these methods are going to give you 100% true confidence. And if they do, it's misplaced, right? It's just about like, can we get a bit more and a bit more and a bit more and a bit more confidence over time?
Yep.
So none of it's going to give you a crystal ball, but you want to give yourself the best chance, the best amount of confidence that you're working on, the right thing, something viable. And the other caveat to all this is like, it's highly personal depending on your situation, right? Some people can afford, they can make a game for 2 years and like it cannot work out, and like that's okay,
Yep.
And some people that's like absolutely, some people that's like devastating. That's not an option. Like, so like Andrew said, maybe if you're a year out, like it's your first game, like keep going. Maybe don't. Like it also depends on, and that's why having like your needs clearly laid out and looking at those every once in a while, looking up a chart at the map is like, when we arrive on the coast, these are the things that still need to be true. It can't have taken this too much time, this much money, we have to get this much back. And if the answer is ultimately at the end of the day, it's a hobby and you don't have to get that much back, like you can throw all this out of the window. I think it'll still help you. But, the more that your livelihood and continued like being able to do what you enjoy, whatever, the more that rides on the outcome, the more these things are critical, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, Neil, I can't thank you enough for being here today. It's been a wonderful conversation and one I'm glad that we had here on the show. Based on what we discussed, any like tip suggestions that you wanted to highlight in order for people to take away with?
I'm going to reverse it. I don't have a tip or suggestion because I think we covered everything pretty clearly. I have a open call. If there's anyone that listens to this and has ways that they're actively doing this type of stuff, small, big, large, medium, humble, sophisticated, like everything in between. If someone is getting early signals about concepts that aren't focused on just like the gameplay, reach out to Andrew, reach out to myself, like, share those things. I'd love to get this. That's my goal here, is like, I'm trying to level myself up, and I would love for this conversation to become more of a broad thing among peers who are also passionate and intrigued, or even if you're just intrigued by this and, want to learn more. I'm always trying to I just stew on this in the back of my head, and I love to talk with anyone who, whenever I get the chance, I talk with a lot of my dev and studio leader friends about this concept, and it's kind of an active brainstorming thing in my world. So
Awesome.
I would say, yeah, anyone that's interested.
I love that call to action. Folks, let's do this. The platform I'm, only really active on is LinkedIn. And what we can do is a post for this episode goes out on every Tuesday, but it will be there. So if you hear this call to action, and I fully support this and love that you did this. Let's not make this a simple takeaway here. Let's make it a collaborative learning experience that we can share, not just with us that listen to the podcast, but with a lot of others. Why don't we share what we're doing and everything else? And that way you share it there. I'll repost everything. I don't care. We just want to get the word out, because as we already shared and identified, there's so many different things that people are doing that haven't caught in mainstream, and it's okay if they become mainstream, because honestly, it's just by, I think, sharing this information, it's going to help so many other people like us, like yourselves, like everybody else, and we could all use it. So, Neil, absolutely love that. Hey, if people want to get in touch, learn more about Ludivore Games, just chat, what are some links or ways people can connect with you?
Yeah, you can hit us up at ludivore.com, Instagram at Ludivore Games. Those are probably the best way. You'll find my email on the website, neil@ludivore.com. I'm not on LinkedIn these days. I haven't been on LinkedIn in like 6 months. It's the best 6 months of my life. I understand it's a necessary evil. But yeah, shoot me an email, neil@ludivore.com, or hit me up on Instagram at Ludivore Games. I'd love to chat.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure as always. And, Neil, keep it real. And, I can't thank you enough, man.
Thank you as well. So great to be back. Look forward to being here next time, where I can officially take the crown from Chris as the most frequent visitor.
Love it. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.